this Net Zero Live session. I'm so delighted to be chairing this one today. So the topic for this session is Net Zero for existing assets, determining an approach for retrofit and refurbishment. We have a really wonderful panel for you today. So I'm going to start off by introducing all of them. Oh, and myself, I'm Jordan Marshall. Sorry, I'm Special Projects Editor at Assemble Media Group. So our first panelist today is Peter Dunn, Regional Director at Faithful and Gould. We have Yatunde Abdul, Head of Climate Action at UKGBC, and Laura Barron, Head of Sustainability at Purcell. Just a little housekeeping from myself before we jump straight into everything. Please send through your questions at any time. We'd love to have as much audience engagement as possible. I'd love to get your views and thoughts. Also, as we always get this sent through a bunch of times, yes, this session will be available on demand. Within about an hour of the session wrapping up, via the same link you've joined now, it'll still be free, still be available. Please feel free to share with a colleague or anybody else you think would find interesting after the session. That's probably enough for me for right now. So I'm going to hand over to Laura first, who is going to provide her views on the topic.
Thanks, Jordan. Just let me know if you have any problems seeing my screen, but hopefully this is working.
That's all good. Thanks, Laura.
Brilliant. Great, cool. Yeah, my name's Laura Barron. I am an architect, but head of sustainability at Purcell, who are the world's largest heritage architecture firm, specialising in the restoration, conservation and adaptive reuse of the historic built environment. As a practice, we've been adapting, restoring and reimagining our existing building stock for 75 years, and we've had the privilege of working on and caring for some of the most recognisable buildings in the UK. And as professionals working in the built environment sector, that sector that is contributing to almost 40% of all greenhouse gas emissions and using about 50% of all extracted materials, we know that the work that we do to restore, reuse the spaces, structures and materials we already have is more important than ever. And the challenge for us now, though, is how do we adapt and reuse our existing buildings in a way that prolongs their life, but in a sustainable and carbon-free way, making them resilient to our rapidly changing climate. And the UK has some of the least energy efficient buildings in Europe, partly due to the age of our building stock, which is old, it's leaky, it's heavily reliant on fossil fuels and to heat and power them. And to put in its simplest terms, the greenest and the cheapest energy is the energy we don't use. So why wouldn't you want to try and address this? So over the last 2 decades, the built environment emissions have reduced by about 30%, but most of this decrease is due to the rapid decarbonisation of the electricity grid rather than improvements in the energy efficiency of buildings. And as you can see from this snapshot of the National Grid Carbon Intensity Dashboard, which I just took yesterday, energy from gas still dominates our supply, and we still have a long way to go. Add to this the issue that 26 million gas boilers in the country that are producing double the total emissions of all the country's gas power plants. In the words of Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the UN, we really do need to be doing everything everywhere all at once. But the opportunities created by retrofitting our existing buildings go way beyond reducing greenhouse gas emissions, if that wasn't enough of an incentive. From reduced energy costs and providing long-term energy security, healthy buildings, comfortable internal environments, ensuring resilience against future uncertainty and minimising risks, increasing market value, avoiding stranded assets, all of this with the added benefit of conserving our natural resources by utilising what we already have. And we've always adapted in our existing buildings as a society has adapted, and needs have changed. This isn't without its challenges, of course. It requires collective action, specialist skills, creative thinking, financial investment, and policy frameworks that actively encourage and incentivise the retention and upgrade of existing buildings. And arguably these challenges are most acutely experienced in our heritage buildings, which come with the added complexity of listed or protected status, increased risk around ageing built fabric and unknown levels of complexity. A recent report highlighting the heritage and carbon skills gap noted that nearly a quarter of all UK homes and almost a third of all commercial buildings are historic buildings. So by that we mean they were built prior to 1919. And the report estimates that retrofitting all of these buildings in this particular category could equate to around 30% of the annual reductions in UK carbon emissions required to meet a sixth carbon budget. So obviously we need to act quickly and decisively and at scale, but a rush to retrofit risks many unintended consequences, especially when dealing with older buildings. So when we think of older buildings that were built prior to 1919, They perform in a different way to modern buildings. So well-maintained and adequately heated and ventilated, traditionally constructed buildings naturally take up and release moisture in a passive way due to their vapor permeable qualities. We use the term breathable often to describe this. In contrast, modern buildings depend on impermeable barriers to control the movement of moisture and air through the building fabric. So think vapor control layers, DPCs, other synthetic membranes. So in traditional buildings, energy efficiency measures that prevent this passive movement of moisture and air, like sealing the building without providing adequate ventilation or using vapor impermeable materials like cement renders and PIR insulation, can lead to problems of moisture accumulation, things like mold, poor indoor air quality, overheating, and damage to the existing fabric. So it's important to understand how a building is functioning as an environmental system and how the implementation of single measures in isolation can have a knock-on negative effects in other areas. So you need to take a whole building approach to retrofitting any existing building and consider the building as a system of interconnected materials, functions, and uses, and understand the effect of external and contextual influences. This is called a whole building approach. And we've tried to simplify this process for considering energy efficiency measures in existing buildings. And it's founded on that principle that the greenest and cheapest energy is the energy you don't use. So starting from a position of knowledge, that is the most crucial step. It's about understanding the context and condition of your building and what is currently impacting the way that it functions and what its impact is. Then it's about eliminating unnecessary energy use. Are there easy wins and low-hanging fruit? So damp fabric, for example, is less thermally efficient. So drying out a damp wall can improve the thermal performance of it by around 30%. Then it's about mitigating the impact of the things that are unavoidable. So, for example, what is the most efficient way of using the space? Are there ways of zoning or using intelligent controls, lighting and electrical appliances that should be as efficient as possible? So LED lights, for example. Then it's about improving the existing building fabric to reduce energy use further through passive means. Upgrading windows, insulating roof, walls, floors, looking at air tightness and considering cold bridges, and obviously remembering how the building is performing and whether or not it needs vapor permeable or impermeable materials. Also consider things like occupant comfort, effective ventilation, and minimizing the risk of overheating. And then last but not least, introducing appropriate active energy technologies that are zero carbon and renewable. And this could include solar panels, heat pumps, district heat networks. This final step is essential to addressing the climate emergency, but jumping to this step too early could risk implementing the wrong solution. And if you don't take steps to reduce energy demand first, the new energy source will need to be larger, work harder, and ultimately cost more to install and to run. So just a couple of examples. We've recently completed a project in collaboration with MCW Architects at the Grade 1 listed St John's College in Cambridge to provide a new student community space and cafe. We gathered extensive data, including assessment of significance, full condition survey, including an appraisal of the building services, in situ U-value calculations, thermal bridging, air tightness testing, environmental monitoring. We did opening up works, we did lots of archival research. And all of that data and research and understanding, through that, we were able to incorporate measures to improve the thermal performance of the fabric. So we incorporated insulation to the inside face of the external walls, a new insulated vapor permeable ground floor slab, and intermediate floors were insulated, as well as fully refurbished and upgraded windows. And the fabric improvement measures are predicted to result in a 39% reduction in peak heating demand and energy use. And that heating demand is met through an air source heat pump, which feeds into new underfloor heating system. And at Newcastle Cathedral, which was recently completed, is also a Grade 1 listed building, as well as preserving and protecting this important place of worship for future generations, sets the cathedral on a path towards net zero through a series of phases to move the building's heating system away from fossil fuels. And so it became one of the first Grade 1 listed cathedrals to install heat pump technology combined with an efficient underfloor heating system. And the work involved lifting over 100 ancient stone ledges, which were carefully restored and relaid. And the reason I'm sharing these two examples specifically is to demonstrate that if we can achieve these measures in the most sensitive of settings, both of these buildings are Grade 1 listed, one from the 16th century, one from the 15th century, we can surely meet the challenge of retrofitting the rest of the UK's building stock. And finally, this is just to show that whilst there are always constraints when retrofitting existing buildings, there are also fantastic opportunities to create exceptional spaces that provide beautiful, comfortable, and healthy environments, whilst also reducing carbon emissions and building climate resilience. And that is me.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Laura. That was such a great way to kick things off. Just while I have you quickly, I just had a particular question that I wanted to ask you. So obviously you were talking very much within that like historically significant and, those complicated building settings just there. Do you think that there are any specifics that you could take away from those projects, like that you would give as, obviously that was the whole point, but if you have like one piece of learning from one of those projects that you could apply to like the wider UK stock, what would that sort of be?
I think, yeah, it's a really good question. I think that process really is applicable to anything, and it's starting from an understanding of where you're at currently, how your building's performing, and that is the how you then efficiently and effectively implement the most useful measures into that particular building. It's only through that understanding really that you can kind of assess how to do that effectively. I think that's start from a position of knowledge, regardless of what building is.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Okay, next we're going to hear from Peter. Peter, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Jordan. I'll just share my slides. Give me 1 second. Can you see that?
Yep, all good.
Great, thank you. So thank you for having me this morning. So my name is Peter Dunn. I'm a regional director at Faithful and Gould, and I've been working on sort of large portfolio net zero programs, and I'm going to take that lens today. So we're talking about sort of the sort of bit before sort of getting into a detailed building plans to sort of understand what we need to do across a portfolio and where to start in terms of investment. So why do we need to look at existing assets? And similar to themes as Laura said, so over 38% of the carbon emissions are coming from the built environment, of which 28% are operational carbon, so the operational carbon that's generated to running and maintaining the buildings, and then 10% of that from the embodied carbon, so the creation of assets, refurbishing assets over its life cycle, and ultimately the demolition and replacement. You can see on the right hand side here, which is a Letty sort of image, which I think really sort of articulates the operational carbon impact. As you finish a project at practical completion, there's a big embodied carbon impact, and then you're into the operational carbon. And as the buildings get refurbished and repurposed over time, you can see over a sort of 60-year life the impact of the operational carbon. So it's really important point. And if you think that 80% of the buildings that we will have in 2050 already exist today, it's a really big challenge. So that's why we're really interested in the existing assets and trying to drive improvements to perform better. So when we think about it from a large building portfolio, what are the common challenges we're coming up against? Firstly, one of them is, where is my carbon? So understanding the operational carbon across that portfolio of buildings, just like Laura just said, it's about understanding that position. Unfortunately, we're not in a place where everyone's got really good sets of data on every building, and the lack of investment in some organisations or the difficulty with getting the data has led to that incomplete data. So that's often a prohibitive piece of work that prevents people starting. Also, then we look at what interventions options are there. There's a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of technologies. So which ones are the right ones for my portfolio, and how do I start making a decent decision around and appraising those options? Optimizing delivery. That's about looking at then sort of, okay, well, I know what I need to do, but I don't know how to make sure I'm doing this the right way. Am I investing in technologies too early? Am I doing the wrong types of work? Am I not taking a systems approach? So some of those challenges are also prohibitive. There's a lot of challenge around the investment cases. So this is going to cost me a lot more money to do this. How do I justify it? How do I make this economical? And how does it stack up in the business case? And then the final thing is, how do I then track my performance? So I'm doing lots of things across my portfolio. I've really started investing money, but how do I track what I'm doing? How does that all feed back to a sort of common goal? And how do I report that so I can articulate to my senior stakeholders, my shareholders, or sort of like independent bodies like Gresham that will impact your sort of ESG sort of performance? So those are some of the common challenges we're coming up against. And then some of the common desirables that we're getting or seeing is by having a portfolio level view and starting this process, you start thinking about, okay, well, I can actually achieve some of these targets. I can also do this in a cost-effective way. So starting to think about other initiatives that are happening in my asset life cycles. So retrofitting the work, thinking about the work that you're doing in line with your maintenance and replacement works. So for example, don't replace a boiler that's just being replaced today, it's gas, wait for the asset to reach the end of its life, and then invest the extra money to get to an air source heat pump if that's the solution you're looking for. So again, looking at how that aligns, but also the operational impact on a business, so making sure you're minimizing that level of disruption. There's also reduction of operational costs. So there's lots of evidence to say we can actually reduce the running costs of the buildings by certain interventions, and also conserving and optimizing building energy efficiency. And then the final one is improving the asset value. So with things like the MEES regulations impacting the EPC ratings and revenue streams such as rentals, occupancy rates, etc., it's really important that these things are starting to protect the asset value, particularly on a portfolio level. There's some broader benefits of net zero. There's a lot here, and Laura said some as well. So, but the three I sort of wanted to call out was, less fuel poverty. There is a connection between mental health and well-being of staff working in offices and being in sort of environmentally conscious buildings. And there's obviously a reputational benefits, attraction of talent in the market, securing sort of key commissions or trying to achieve business goals. There's a significant benefit from net zero carbon programs. So that's sort of a bit about the challenge and sort of the desired outcomes. Within S&C Lavenham, Atkins and F&G have sort of broken that challenge down into 3 stages. So we have 3 stages called benchmark, roadmap, and deliver, which are part of our sort of decarbonomics approach. So benchmarking is all about making your carbon visible. So we need to establish at portfolio level the baseline. So what is the carbon emissions from each building? What's the energy use? What's our utility costs? This will really start allowing us to understand the foundation of our baseline to then make good investment decisions in the latter stages. We need to understand our data. So facility condition assessments have been done, energy audits, metering or sub-metering data, utility bills. What's available? Let's have a look at that and understand what's also missing. And when you've got data gaps, how do we fill those data gaps? So this is directly dealing with that challenge of poor data. So what we do typically is we use our carbon data insight to create proxy data to inform data gaps. We look at publicly available data on certain building typologies and certain assets. But we also look at taking a sort of snapshot of the buildings to sort of create some site assessments to then not do a full level of surveys across the portfolio at this stage. That will come later as you decide exactly the investment plan on each of those buildings, and you start making resource strategic decisions like Laura described on the whole building. But at this stage, it's about sort of understanding the level of accuracy from those sites assessments to then create informed positions. And that's going to give you a good baseline. You can then pull that into dashboards that then start bringing all that information together that articulates your starting position. So you can look at the number of buildings, the total area in those buildings, utility fees and costs, bills, the amount of carbon that's being generated. You can look at the age of construction, you can look at the EPC rating, and what we're starting to really sort of find valuable for clients with large portfolios is linking the EPC rating to the EUI. So what buildings across my assets sit in certain EPC ratings that are higher D&E that could potentially have significant capital investment needed, but also how does that relate to my EUI performance as a portfolio, and linking that back to other benchmarks such as UK Green Building Council's targets and some of the LETI targets we see in their retrofit guides. And then having the ability to cut that data into different ways. So looking at carbon as a priority, what are the top 10 carbon emitters, which ones have got the utility bills, and also looking at leases in these buildings where there's offices, etc. So when a lease is up, where have we got buildings that are in FRI leases and it's difficult to understand what's going on in those buildings because you don't have access. So again, all of that's starting to build a really strong foundation to make good decision making informed by data. Then we move to roadmap stage. So this is defining your route to net zero. So again, what do we look here? So we need to define, firstly, when are we trying to achieve net zero by? What are the emissions reduction targets? So is it 50% by 2030? And there are other interim goals you're also looking to challenge, and having a really clear plan on that allows you to then start targeting and be informed on your decision making. We then look at set specific actions, so the interventions, the buildings, the timelines, lining that with other programs that you might have across the asset management. So I mentioned critical maintenance programs or replacement repair. Considering budget constraints, so looking at where we're investing in money on certain programs already to keep the asset viable and working. What's the extra over cost on these certain things, and how does that impact? What are sort of funding sources and grants and what might be available? And then scenario testing, so looking at various scenarios where you're trying to prioritize whether it's carbon, whether it's utilities bill savings, or whether it's a return on investment from your investment on the various interventions. And then sort of roadmap transparency to having really clear actions for each of the buildings and a really sort of clear sort of approach to how you're going to track the performance and measure and verify the outputs during the sort of deliver stage. I'm just going to reconfirm what Laura said about systems thinking. You can't really think about interventions in isolation because you can make some bad decisions. So we always recommend the fabric first, which I think is well understood in the market. So let's look at how we can improve the fabric of the building, reduce the energy wastage across the building. Then that allows you to start thinking about, okay, actually the performance of the buildings might need a lower specification in the heating elements. So the air source heat pump might actually be a lower spec, therefore helping some of those capital investment challenges you have and making it economically viable. So really thinking about that. You also want to roll in other programs. So if you've got maintenance programs and you've got leaking roofs, you don't want to be putting PVs up there before you've dealt with the roof. So again, just having those kind of really sort of system thinking approach. This then allows you again to create a dashboard where you can start looking at, if I don't do anything, what's the business as usual position? So this top line, so this is relying on the grid decarbonising, and then looking at the series of interventions that are available, and typically looking at things like light replacement, BMS, fabric improvement, ventilation improvement, air source heat pumps potentially instead of gas, and then looking at PV sort of interventions as a sort of mix. And then you're allowing to look at, okay, well, actually, if we focus on carbon savings, where's that get me to my net zero target? If I look at operational cost savings, where does that get me in terms of my projection? And then what's the optimum between those to get my return on investment? And marginal basement cost curves can also help you articulate, where am I going to get the best bang for my buck in terms of carbon savings from investment? And then having programs that sort of come out that allow you to start thinking about building by building plans, which you would then start rolling into the deliver stage and more detailed analysis on what the interventions are and how you turn them into construction packages. So then we move to deliver, which is about program delivering the sort of roadmap. And this is all about, again, let's look at the program of activities, the supply chain approach that you have. So it's existing facility management contracts to utilize to benefit quick low-hanging fruit like LED lights, BMS sources. Do we need to look at frameworks for contractors in regions? So you've got a sustainable delivery in regions, both from environmental but also socially and economically, that allow you to mobilize workforces to deliver against the certain buildings you have in those regions. And then sort of looking at a data management as well, and really understanding, the carbon emissions you're saving and the energy use. It's really important that we're looking at the benefit realizations of these programs and linking them back to the business case and the roadmap originally to make sure that you're on track or you're adapting as capital spend changes each year or other risks or challenges come into the program. And then I think in terms of the outputs, again, it's about trying to create good visualization of where you are. One of the common things I find is it's lots of good things, but how do I articulate, my actual across this portfolio, what my actual carbon savings are against the forecast, what the spend in terms of capital cost versus the actual cost is, and then looking at each building and sort of understanding where it is in the project stage. So is it in design stage? Is it being tendered? Is it being implemented and installed? Are we measuring and verifying? And all this stuff helps provide confidence and transparency to the senior sort of stakeholders that we need to demonstrate that we're moving the journey along. So my closing summary is just to say, three kind of key stages: make carbon visible, and so you can make really good informed decisions. Roadmap to find the route to net zero, and sort of really sort of bespoke it towards your requirements across the estate. And then think about how you're going to deliver the program and how you're going to track the benefits and make sure that measurement verification is robust. So that's me. Thank you. Back to you, Jordan.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Peter. That was another great presentation. Got plenty of questions coming through, but I think I might swing on to Yatunde first, and then we can get into the group discussion. So Yatunde, if you wouldn't mind sharing your slides so that we can all have a look, that'd be wonderful. Well, I think you're still muted there, Yatunde. Would you mind unmuting yourself?
Yeah, that's fine.
Perfect.
Thanks, Jordan. So, yeah, thank you for introducing me. Yatunde Abdo, Head of Climate Action from UKGBC, and was really pleased to be invited today to join this discussion on retrofit and refurbishment. So, it makes sense for me to just say a little bit about UKGBC and the angle that I'll be coming from, which will be a little bit different from Laura and Peter. So UKGBC, the UK Green Building Council, is a member-led industry network organisation, and our focus is really to represent the unified voice of industry's current and future leaders who are working together to deliver a just transition across the sector. And our focus is specifically lasered in on the climate and nature crises. So as part of that, we have over 700 organisations from across the value chain, and that puts us in a fantastic position to not only positively influence policy, but also identify pathways required to propel the sector forward sustainably, as well as really looking at solutions and helping to share information and where appropriate upskill to support the transformation of our buildings, communities, cities and infrastructure so that we all can thrive and nature also. So you can see there on the screen our mission, UKGBC's mission, to radically improve the sustainability of the built environment by transforming the way it's planned, designed, constructed, maintained and operated. So really thinking across that value chain and with that length of that broad spectrum of members as well, how we support them and the built environment sector in general in doing that. So as a member-led network, we collaborate to advocate, enable and inspire accelerated leadership and action, primarily focused on businesses and government within 5 key impact areas: so climate change, resource use, nature and biodiversity, health and well-being and socioeconomic impact. So it felt important to just take that step back and share a bit about UKGBC before going on to this slide, which relates to the Whole Life Carbon Roadmap, which we worked with industry to create. So over 100 built environment organisations were involved and came together to set a common vision and agreed step-by-step actions for achieving net zero in the construction, operation and demolitions of buildings and infrastructure. Now you can see from that slide there, it sets a pathway for the UK to achieve net zero carbon by 2050, laying out what we have to work with and what we have to get to by 2050 for those different sectors. And you can see that line that indicates business as usual. If we just keep on the way that we're doing at the moment, then we're obviously not going to get there. But also shows the work that needs to happen to support us in getting to where we need to go. So taking a step back and just pulling out commercial buildings for a moment, which I'll be focusing on, and existing buildings. So the energy required to heat, power and operate commercial buildings accounts for nearly 23%, as you can see there, of the built environment's carbon footprint, which equates to around about 6% of the UK's carbon footprint. And I think the MEES regulations have been mentioned previously, but as some of you on the line might be aware, they are likely, so the minimum, that stands for the minimum energy efficiency standard. That's likely to be extended to include all new and as well as existing commercial leases within 2023. And by 2030, you can see that indication of EPC-B on the slide. All new and existing commercial buildings will be required to have an EPC-B rating as a minimum condition for letting. So when it comes to the portion that, of the cake, if you like, that relates to commercial buildings, there's quite a substantial chunk there that needs to that we need to focus on. And I think it was, as Peter said in one of his slides, that 80% of the buildings that we have now will still be with us in 2050. There's quite a lot that the importance on retrofit and refurbishment can't be underestimated in terms of helping us to get to that 2050 target and what we need to do. So where does UKGBC fit in all of this? We're obviously not consultants, we're not the building owners ourselves, we represent that voice of industry. And a lot of what we do in terms of that collaborating, advocating, especially the enabling as well as inspiring, is bringing together organisations to try and workshop and identify those solutions that we need to try and overcome these that challenge, specifically on net zero in this case. So I just wanted to take a moment to pause and to briefly mention for us what was a foundation setting report launched last year, round about the key considerations for commercial retrofit. And one of the aspects of that identified to us by industry and by the built environment sector was a lack of consistency and clarity around about the key definitions associated with light and deep retrofit. So what we did, working with a whole range of stakeholders, was to clarify light and deep retrofit, to make that distinction clearer for all, to support that whole process of considering what's needed for the type of interventions needed for retrofit and at what stage as well. So that brings us to a current project that we are that is in progress right now, and that is all about identifying the costs and also pathways for interventions as well for commercial retrofit. So again, thinking about those solutions on an industry-wide scale to guide a whole range of organisations across the value chain in this on their pathway towards net zero, specifically considering commercial retrofit. So an aspect of the project is thinking about the plan, as you can see there, planning and optimization. What can you do at that stage? And although it feels like this is using different language from both Laura and Peter, very much chimes in with what they were saying and showing in their previous presentations as well. Like retrofit measures, where is that across the life cycle of the building? And what can you do at different stages over that life cycle? And then deep retrofits, you don't obviously get in that often to be able to do them depending on lease arrangements, etc. So when you do get in there, what type of interventions might well be possible, and what type of cost range are you thinking about as well? So just a little bit more that I thought might be interesting about this project and the type of guidance and information it will provide. Modelling and cost, specifically thinking about embodied and operational carbon and estimating the cost impacts, will be the three key aspects of information that will come out of this, and support aspects in terms of the business case, an analysis of strategies when you're trying to decide what form of retrofit to take at different stages over that building's life, and probably importantly for quite a lot of buildings, when that deep retrofit can happen, depending on lease arrangements, etc. And then maybe just pausing briefly on targets. I think EUIs have been mentioned before as well. Thinking very much about EUIs, the differences for different commercial retrofits, and what is an appropriate target to set and aim for, and then model across as well. That'll also be one of the key outputs of this building, of this project also. So case studies are always really important, helping to set it in context. So there'll be the theoretical information, if you like, provided, but then also a whole range of case studies as well, setting it in reality in terms of what is possible, taking those examples for those different organisations across the value chain. So yeah, I'll stop there and look forward to the discussion.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Tunde. That was another great presentation. We've had 3 really strong ones to kick things off, and we've had plenty of questions coming in for you all. So if I could ask you, Tunde, if you could stop sharing your slides, if that's okay. And if Peter and Laura could pop their cameras back on and join us, that'd be wonderful. Okay. I'm going to just jump straight in. We've had so many coming through from the audience. I'm going to try and jump in to some of them that have come through. But one of the ones that I think is sort of applicable to everybody. You've all talked about really interesting interventions and, plans of attack, but people are sort of asking, what are the main barriers you encounter on these sorts of projects that we're talking about here, and how can we sort of overcome those? We've had a variation of those questions coming in, so I've tried to amalgamate a few there. So the first one came in while you were talking, Peter, so maybe I will put it to you first. What is the main sort of barriers that you face in implementing, this approach, and how do you overcome those? And then obviously we'll go to everyone else.
Yeah, I think the 2 main barriers. I mean, there are plenty, and there's plenty of reasons that put off getting started. But one of the key things is not having data on existing buildings and really understanding the existing building's performance. And without knowing that, you can make a lot of bad investment decisions or not really understand how it's contributing to the wider portfolio. So an example for me, we work with a central government organisation, and they found actually 80% of their operational carbon was in 10 of their 100 buildings. So that starts making quite a big impact in terms of your decision making, how you target your sort of plans to sort of get some big impacts in terms of net zero carbon. So data is a really, really powerful thing that gets you into that sort of foundation position, as I say. I think the other one is it's cost, and it's resource, and it's labour, and it's all the things that we have challenges with, considerable economic challenges that have hit the UK for a number of years now. However, I do think there's an opportunity. I'd really like to see us look at the industry and say, actually, there's a huge amount of work to be done here. There's a huge amount of material, labour, wider skill sets, consultancy, professional services, design that needs to go into this space. And accelerating that seems to then put us in a place that we can really sort of start building the economy and the sort of green revolution around some of these challenges. And that's also an exportable thing. There's lots of people quoting that Denmark has spent a lot of money in investing in the wind turbines offshore, and now they're sort of benefiting of this global export that they've created. I was at a conference the other day, and people were talking about the Southern Estuary being an asset, and why can't we look at tidal interventions at a macro scale that support local economies, and that becomes an exportable sort of profession and asset. So it's there's solutions, and there's some big thinking needs to happen. People really need to sort of understand how they can get involved, but it all comes back to sort of understanding what we're trying to do and having a really clear target. So there's probably a lot of sort of sub answers in there, but those are some of my sort of main things that bother me most of the time.
Brilliant. Thanks, Peter. Laura, how about you?
Yeah, I'd chime very much with what Peter just said, and to be honest, I've had quite a lot of conversations with owners and occupiers of buildings, particularly with the project that we're doing at the moment, the City of London Corporation, and cost is the biggest barrier, and lack of kind of government support and funding for these measures. So working really hard to try and build that business case, like with a lot of the measures that Peter suggested, and how you kind of look at the long-term investment. You don't have to try and achieve everything all at once. You don't have to fix everything tomorrow. It's just looking at what what capital expenditure you've got coming up in the pipeline, and are there ways of getting incorporating retrofit measures in amongst that already assumed expenditure. I think complexity as well. Obviously, we're working a lot with heritage buildings, and I think that there's an assumption that there's a kind of clash between conservation and sustainability, and it's just isn't and doesn't need to be the case. And there are, hopefully with the examples that I showed, there's solutions that you can kind of that preserve both, really, and working around that sort of legislative context, and the lack of clarity particularly between local authorities. So yeah, there's a lot of challenges and barriers, but chiming with what Peter says, I think that we do need to really see the opportunities in this, and we've got a lot of skills and resources, and we've been adapting our old buildings for as long as we've had buildings, so we should be able to do this.
Absolutely. I did the classic thing there where I forgot to unmute myself. You'd think I'd learn after all the time on these sorts of platforms recently. Yatunde, obviously you're coming from a bit of a different perspective, having created the framework for others to sort of implement. Have you sort of had any thoughts on this point that you'd like to add?
I think what Peter and Laura have said pretty much chimes with a lot of what we've heard from our members, in terms of what's needed and what the current challenges are as well. I think that point about, in my words, knowing your building is really, really important to understand what the issue is, so that when you do present the business case to whoever it might be, internally or externally, to set you on the path to bring in consultants to support you on that work, that it is likely to be accepted and it's thought through, not just at the point where you feel there is an intervention needed, but really over the life of that building, because it's about its performance over an extended period of time. So that's definitely been coming through loud and clear, not just from the membership, but also as part of this project as well. And I think the other aspect is that the challenges of actually being able to retrofit, and thinking about those lease agreements as well, and when you can get in to do various levels of retrofit. So I'll come back to light retrofit versus deep retrofit. You might be able to get in maybe once every 10 years, or be able to look at partially a portion of the building to be able to do that as well. So then what does that mean for your net zero target or trajectory, and how does that factor into when you think you might be able to actually record those lowered carbon emissions? That whole side of things can be quite challenging, because you can't just wait until all your tenants leave before you can get in to actually do something with the building as well. So I think that's also an aspect that's coming back loud and clear, thinking about the challenges around about retrofit, and planning for light retrofits and really being organized in terms of how you do it can help with that. But then it's all about that knowledge and awareness as well, which I think we've all been, or that's already been commented on anyway. Oh, Jordan, I think you've done the classic again.
Doing well today. I might just have to leave myself unmuted. There's just some construction work going on outside, so I'm trying to be good. So we've got another one coming that I'd love to get your guys' perspective on. So we've been asked, how can community engagement and stakeholder involvement be effectively incorporated into the design and implementation of net zero retrofit and refurbishment projects? And what are the benefits of getting that engagement and buy-in? Does anyone have any particular thoughts on that? I'm willing to see if anyone wants to be a volunteer. If not, I can pick on someone.
I'm very happy to.
Yep.
So I think that's a great question. I really like that question. One of the things that's really interesting about net zero carbon programs is it's a change program, a lot of it. It's affecting people. It's getting behaviours to adapt, to understand what the benefits are of doing certain things, like not heating the buildings at 22 degrees or 21 degrees, to bringing them down to more like 16, 17, as as an example. But trying to get people to understand what you're trying to achieve and how they can contribute to that is a hugely valuable way of getting a lot of big inroads into this challenge. And I think, with I'm again working with organizations, I'm seeing them looking at the net zero programs, and they're going, okay, well, if I'm going to carry out a series of surveys, I'm going to carry out a series of investments nationally across my portfolio, there's a lot of social benefit that can come into this as well. So as I said in my sort of slide deck, you can look at SMEs, local technologies, local teams that can start supporting the work. There's also wider sort of benefits that cities and towns can look at in terms of how they start looking at how they run and plan those cities, and get people to be more cycle friendly in some of the wider scopes that are not just building related. So those are all really powerful sort of change management processes that I think are really important. So to summarize, I guess it's making people clear why you're doing it, articulating how they can do it, and then showing some investment into the benefits of it, I think, are the key bits.
Absolutely. Laura, Laura, you unmuted yourself. You can go first.
I think that, Peace covered a lot of really good points there. I agree. It's a really good question. I think there's also an opportunity for when you're bringing community or building occupiers and users along on the journey with you, that they then get a kind of sense of pride of what you're trying to do and the organization and your aspirations. And I think that can encourage a slightly different relationship with your built environment as a whole. And if you're wanting to make it a better place for everybody, particularly the people that are using it, I think that can only be a good thing. And bringing in lots of different ideas. This is a kind of a collective effort that we can't all just go and do, and we can't expect things to just happen to people. And it's taking that responsibility and ownership that everybody's got a bit of a role to play, I think is a really good opportunity.
No, absolutely. I think that's a really valid point there. Yatunde, did you have anything else you want to add on this one?
I feel like I'm always coming up at the end because all the good points have already been mentioned.
You can go first next time.
I suppose the only thing that I'd add, just thinking specifically about building occupants, is being able to access those spaces, and building that relationship and understanding with the tenants is key, because otherwise that lack of knowledge and that lack of engagement will lead to a barrier in itself to be able to get in to just even do those light retrofit work. But then there's also the understanding around about deep retrofit work if you are splitting the building and still have tenants in the building as well. So in addition to everything that Pete and Laura has said, it is about taking them on that journey, helping to promote understanding and dialogue, and then seeing the benefits together. So yeah, it can only be a fantastic thing, really.
Absolutely. And sort of on that point of like engaging with like the end user, we've had a bunch of questions coming in asking various things about like post-occupancy data collection and follow-up and how significant that is, and how you can then apply lessons learnt to future projects. I know that's covering a lot of ground, but people were sort of asking for views on first of all, how important it is to like revisit projects once you've handed over the keys, and then secondly, what you should be doing with that information. Yatunde, would you like to go first this time?
I mean, that's quite a specific one, and it's one I would suggest might be better placed for a landlord or an occupant to talk about. But what I would say is, when thinking about tracking progress against net zero, it is really important to be recording progress as you go along, and part of that will be the access to different spaces to be able to do that with tenants depending on your lease agreements and whatever else. So post-occupancy evaluations, not just in terms of the benefits for the occupants and the health well-being benefits, but also thinking about the energy and carbon related benefits as well, are key and important. to have that continuous information and tracking to determine that you're still on that trajectory to get you to where you need to go. So I would just say it is really important, but that's probably as far as I can say.
Yeah, no worries at all. Laura, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really, really good question. And building performance evaluation, I think, is one of those things. It's got to be part of an iterative process. So you learn things and you feed it back into another part of the process and learn from it. Particularly if you're doing things in a kind of phased way, you can learn a lot from the first phase and then learn lessons and hopefully save money and do things better the next time round. So it's crucial for that. It's crucial for the performance gap and avoiding that kind of the actual energy in use energy performance data being different to what was designed. And that's the crucial thing that clients should want to know, and designers should also want to know. And it's also kind of, again, like, about that engagement piece. It's bringing people along on that journey and making sure that you've delivered on the things that you wanted to deliver on. So yeah, I think it is crucial, and I think it should be just an inherent part of how we're designing and how we're working, how we're constructing things, that we want to learn and share widely, not just within our own kind of bubble. Share these lessons widely so we can all learn from each other.
Brilliant. Peter, did you have anything you wanted to add on that one?
Yeah, I've got a couple of points. I think it's a good question, because I think if you look at the government green book and business cases, the requirement is always to verify the output of the construction work and tying that back to the business case to demonstrate that you've actually hit those critical success factors. But when we're too busy, we always go on and get onto the next project, or we're looking at the next sort of thing we need to look at. And actually, there's a huge amount of value in spending time at the sort of finishing of refurbishment or new build, practical completion stage, in investing in this time. And this includes behaviours for people who are operating the building, managing the building, understanding what the technology is meant to be doing, because if the design teams have got a very good idea, does it transfer into how it's being run, for the next 60 years? So it's a really important area that we need to spend more energy and time in. It's not maybe as glamorous as building a new building, but we've got to spend time in it to take on this challenge. I think we need to invest more in asset management. We've talked about asset management since I've been, it's been 20 years, we've talked about good asset management, investing in it. A lot of the challenge we have now wouldn't be as big a challenge if we had really good data and really good asset management in place consistently across our estates and our sort of building stock. So again, there's an opportunity here, and I'm seeing it being combined with the economic case for net zero to invest in asset management alongside, to increase the data and knowledge of the buildings, because this isn't going to be the last initiative that's coming down from an ESG perspective. There's plenty more coming, so it's a good moment in time, I think, to sort of look at that dual investment. And then I think just when you work on these bigger programs, if you've got 4 or 5 years worth of interventions, maybe 10 years worth of interventions, if you're not demonstrating the value creation each year back to the investment, the money will be turned off. So you need to be making sure that you're demonstrating the value, and some of it's very quantifiable, some of it's less quantifiable, but you need to be pushing it and having a consistent way of doing it, and thinking about it before you start the investment. So it should be part of your roadmap plan. Those maybe 3 points, not 2.
No, that's completely fine. We've actually had quite a few points about sort of, where do you see this? Does this need to be driven by clients or asset owners in terms of this retrofit agenda, or are there ways that the sector can, the wider construction sector and built environment sector, can help start driving? And is it sort of proving that commercial viability and business case? Is that the key to getting more people on board? That's an amalgamation of a few questions, so I've sort of crammed a few things in there together. But if anybody has any views, I'd be really interested to hear some thoughts. No, that's okay.
I just don't want to go first. It's probably better to get someone else's perspective first.
Okay. Itunde, do you want to go ahead?
Yes. No. So I've just had some building work started outside as well. So hopefully that's not coming through on the mic. I I mean, the way to get this going, I think the business case is quite important in terms of making it clear what it is that you're trying to do. And then also, and then how that's communicated to relevant stakeholders as well. But just taking a step back and thinking about the value of doing this, there's obviously the monetary value in terms of the savings that could be made, embodied carbon, operational carbon savings as well, but then also the quality of the building. So there's an incentive there, which is always one of the key drivers, which is the money side. But then also just thinking about the more societal side and just transition side in terms of the crisis that we are facing. It is a climate crisis. I think it was this recently that the UK had its first 40-degree day. And while it's great to think of summers just being, nice and warm, this is going to happen more and more. So it's in all of our interest to just get on with it, really, and to start to think more about how we consider and net zero in all of our decision making also. So yes, there's that money driver in terms of the savings that could be made, and it'd just be a better quality building and a better quality investment in many ways. And linked back to health and well-being, as has been talked about, a better place to potentially be in terms of that building. But then let's also think about the fact that ultimately we need to just get on with it, really. And so how do we all start to think about just in every step that we take, what we can be doing to help ensure this just moves forward, rather than waiting for government or industry or a larger body to set that drive for us. Yeah.
Brilliant. No, I think that's some really great points there. Peter, did you have something that you wanted to add?
I was just going to say, I think there is a need to be a consistent, and you've heard different views and ways of approaching decarbonising, whether it's 3 stage or it's 5 stages, or and they're all really valuable and are all very clear, and they help massively. But for clients who are trying to understand what the best thing is, quite a lot of options that aren't consistent and knowing what's the right thing to do versus the wrong thing. So I do think there's a lot to be said to helping across the industry make it a bit more consistent, a bit more of a mature space, and hopefully become just a sort of mainstream deliverable that we all can sort of coordinate and talk to. And I think the sooner we do that, the easier it is to get things moving in a consistent way.
Brilliant. Thanks. Laura, did you have anything that you wanted to add on that one, or are you happy?
I mean, all the points have been really well covered. The only thing I think it does need everybody's concerted effort, both from a top down and a bottom up, and it's continuing to put pressure on our government to make sure that they're putting the legislative frameworks and the funding in place to ensure these things happen. But like Yatunti says, we can't wait for that to happen. We kind of just have to get going. So it's just finding passionate and inspired people that want to drive these things forward, and kind of, like she said, get on with it.
Brilliant. Okay, I'm very conscious we've covered a lot of ground and we only have a couple of minutes left. So my last question to you all is, if you wanted people to walk away today with one thing at the top of their minds on this topic, what would it be? I don't want to pick on anyone necessarily, but if nobody really wants to go first, Laura, you haven't been first in a little while, so I might go here.
I'm just going to bang on the same drum and say, start from a position of knowledge, understand where you are, and kind of start from there. It's kind of been said by all of us in some form, but I think that that's a really strong message. Just get the data and kind of start that process and just figure it out from there.
Brilliant. Yatunti?
I think it's about thinking about you as an individual, what you can do yourself. We all live in houses and homes. It doesn't mean that you go about retrofitting your home, but when it comes to an energy efficiency measure at some point, what's something simple that you can do, and to think about that yourself just in your daily life, and then ideally that would translate through into your work as well. So it really is, it for me, it starts with individual. Just think about what you can do yourself on the simplest thing you can do, and then where that can lead to.
Brilliant. And Peter?
I'd probably just reiterate, sort of, I think getting started, if you haven't, is really important. It's okay not to have all the information at the beginning. You know, good assumptions. There's enough knowledge in the industry to support you. So you know, get started. And I think I agree in terms of, you know, every individual has their own duty of care in this space. So you know, lead by example. Don't always take the easy option. Try and break old habits that aren't sort of contributing to the benefit of net zero and the wider sustainability agenda.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Peter. And that's brought us to the end of the session. I'd love to thank all of our speakers. You've all been so insightful and generous with your time and expertise today. So I really want to thank you all. We've had great feedback from the audience. So I really appreciate that. We have another session on at 2 o'clock, so be sure to check that out. But for now, I'd just like to say a huge thanks again to the audience, to our speakers, to Atkinson, Faithful and Gould for helping today happen. And that's it from me. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.